Welcome to Take It from the Ironwoman. My name is Susanne Mueller, your host and the Ironwoman. This podcast is about empowering yourself and others to make real changes in the world. You will hear from everyday, smart, sophisticated, hip people like you and me. Not everybody has to be an Ironwoman to impress the world. Together, we will learn from the sports and business leaders how you can become a more successful person as an entrepreneur or a leader. It's one step at a time, one day at a time. Take your steps now. Take your big steps now. Join me on this journey to success. Take it from the Ironwoman. We only have special guests, and today we have the most recent graduate from Columbia University with an MFA. We all gonna learn what MFA is. So it's Kayla Heisler. Welcome. Maybe you introduce yourself a little bit and also tell us, what is an MFA?
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Kayla. I'm a writer. I started off writing personal essays, but now I do more book reviews and cultural criticism. The MFA, it stands for Master in Fine Arts, and the one I have is in nonfiction writing. It's usually at Columbia a 2-year program, but I worked full-time while I was there, so it actually took me 4 years with the coursework. And then I did a research arts year where I taught. I was there for 5 years, which is a really long time to do the program, but it was worth it for sure.
Wow, that sounds really cool. You demonstrated that you have the endurance and probably the perseverance of going to school for 5 years. Tell us more about that.
I think that the biggest, the time that the perseverance worked the most was just being able to write and find the headspace after work, because sometimes you don't realize how much headspace you can use, like working a 9 to 5 during the daytime. Really just blocking off time to write, especially the more personal bits that require a lot of emotion, just protecting that time on weekends. There would be a few times where my friends would want to go out and go to brunch or something, and I would have to say, sorry guys, I've got to work on something. I have something for workshop. For anyone who doesn't know, workshop in MFA programs and writing programs is where your cohort, your class every week will read 2 or 3 pieces. You'll just bring in a piece and distribute it to the class, and they'll have a week to read it and give you notes. Then everyone sits around and gives you feedback on what worked and didn't in the story, and you get copies of their criticism back. That's another skill that is helpful for the MFA, is just getting really used to providing feedback and taking feedback pretty well.
Wow, I'm learning something. I thought like MFA is you're just writing, but obviously it's also learning to receive feedback and criticism from others, how to make it better. So you produce a piece, you get feedback, and then how many times do you go back to that piece till you think, now this is the right thing? And before we recorded, you said, get rid of the perfectionism. How many reiterations do you have of a piece that you're writing?
Sometimes there's too many to count, honestly. I always tell myself this will be the time where I keep track of every draft, but especially in Google Docs, that's what I used to work with. You change so many things, but in terms of sort of having things workshopped, I think the most I've had something workshopped is maybe 3 times. That would probably be like twice by one workshop. And then the next semester, I would make edits and then another one. And then for my thesis, there were things that I edited just kind of continuously. It really depends, but there was a piece that I started, I'm going to say in 2019, and I really edited it up until it was due in March, like this March. Sometimes it does take a while. It's hard because like the perfectionism can creep in where things could always be a little bit better. But I think the nice thing about having people who you really trust giving you feedback is that once you've done as much as you think you can show them. And then if they say, oh, I thought this was great, it's just, I was unclear about these 3 things. You can make those adjustments and say, all right, I'm not touching it anymore. I'll submit it now and see what happens. And if that editor gives me feedback, I'll take it. But just hands off.
Sometimes it's better just to let it go. Is there ever a time that you're like, I can't look at this piece anymore?
Oh, definitely. Especially after something's been workshopped, a lot of times that's when that would set in. I think that a lot of times it does sort of skew for things that are a little more emotional. I write about my childhood a lot. With those pieces, sometimes it's like, okay, I'm not going to open that file for 2 weeks or something after having a big edit. But then sometimes coming back to something with fresh eyes, even if it's, say, something that I would have finished, say, if I finished something in the spring semester, sometimes I wouldn't look at it all summer. But then in the fall, I would be like, oh, this one big problem I was having with the format, I read something and that format just completely changed it. There was this one essay that I had written about being an only child that I just couldn't figure out how to start it. None of the starts I was doing was working. I read a book by Morgan Jerkins, Wandering in Strange Lands, I think it's called. And the way she opens the book, it's like a prologue, but the way she opened it, I was, oh, that's the exact type of start that I want. Just this almost fairy tale beginning to something that's going to be very heavily researched. So a lot of times if I can't look at something and I can't write, I can read, and that's where the inspiration will come and I'll be able to fix whatever issues are there.
Thank you for sharing all your wisdom here. Usually what I hear is that writers read a lot. Is that a fair assumption?
It is. I will say, at least for myself, sometimes I feel a little blocked. Like, especially if I've been reading a lot or if I've been working a lot, sometimes I can kind of be overloaded to the point where I'm like, all right, I just want to watch TV for a little bit. But it's definitely easier for me to write when I am reading. I love reading. Like, some of my favorite days are just a weekend day where I start a book in the morning as soon as I get up and I spend the entire day reading until I go to sleep. Those are some of the best days.
Oh, I can imagine. What kind of books can you recommend to the audience?
Well, even though I mostly write nonfiction, sometimes when I read nonfiction, that makes me think too much in a way. I'm trying to think, oh, what can I learn from that? A lot of times I do gravitate toward fiction. I was lucky enough to have an advanced copy of All Night Pharmacy that comes out in July by Ruth. I believe her last name is Medivsky, but it's just a fantastic book. That was one that I read in the day that I couldn't put down. It takes place in LA and it's really just surreal. There's like a little bit of mysticism in it, which I thought was really cool. For nonfiction, I just finished the memoir Almost Brown by Charlotte Gill, and she writes about her upbringing, having an Indian father and a British mother, and growing up in New York and then eventually Canada. Just the way she writes is so beautiful, but also really funny. And I always admire writers who can talk about really serious things, but in a way that still has humor. Those are two things that I've recently read that I just really loved.
We also have to say how you and I got together. Thanks to EdSnaps, they had a writers author event. And I was also picked. And I always say, I'm not a writer. I envy you. You have an MFA, Masters in Fine Art. You're a writer. This is your profession. I don't call myself a writer. But
you've also written 2 books.
I know, but in a way, I'm intimidated. Like, you have been published and I only did self-publishing, which I think is even harder. But to get to a publisher is also a hard way. What is next for you after you have such a prestigious degree behind your name?
I think right now my big project is revising my thesis project, which was an essay collection in memoirs, or a memoir and essays, rather. That's the first big thing. Then eventually I would like to edit somewhere. I really love helping other writers shape their work and get it in front of more people. And then eventually I think I would like to go back to teaching college. I had the opportunity to do that last semester and I really enjoyed it, but I do think I need to take a little time on my projects before I go forward into teaching again.
What are you teaching and writing?
Actually got to teach a seminar. It was called Traditions in Nonfiction. And I got to design the syllabus. I included a few different memoirs, criticism, historical writing. It was a lot of fun because I got to sort of go through archives of other books that I have and things that I had read when I was an undergrad. That was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it, but it does take a lot of time, especially if you're someone who's really invested in it. And I just want to spend a little time on my own projects and learn more before I can go back and share my knowledge with other writers.
And how did you get into this? Were you reading all the time or writing? Tell us a little bit more how the start of Kayla was.
I was just always a kid who just gravitated toward books. I could spend the whole day in the library. It was just always very easy for me. And part of that was growing up as an only child. I didn't even have cousins around my age, really. I was really the only child in my family. I would read. That was just an easy thing to do alone. And from an early age, I kept a diary and I started writing poems pretty early. It was just always something that was really natural. The couple things that really sort of put me into overdrive to be like, this is the path was in high school. We would have career fairs. And the only one that seemed like it was even possible was the local newspaper, which was the Shelby Star. I remember just sitting in there, and we didn't even have any published book authors or anything. I wasn't even really thinking that, but I've got to just tell stories. English was always my favorite class. It always just came pretty naturally to me. Then I joined yearbook my junior year of high school. And that was, to me, honestly, yearbook was the best part of high school. I just felt like myself, and my yearbook advisor was just the coolest person. And it just came really naturally to me. That's when I was really writing is for me, I've got to figure out some way to make a living doing this. I knew for a fact that I had to move to New York for college because there are other places where you can be a writer. You can be a writer anywhere, but just in terms of connections and so many writers who I admired lived there, I just right away went to New York. Then I started off as a journalism major because at that point, I hadn't even heard of like literary nonfiction. When I heard they had a nonfiction major, I just thought it was like math textbooks. I didn't realize that nonfiction or essays could be funny or fun or personal. So once I started finding writers like David Sedaris and Leslie Jameson and just all of these, like James Baldwin, all of these really smart, interesting writers, I was like, that's what I want to do instead. From there on, I joined the school literary magazine and was just 100%.
Wow. I see you as the next Amanda Gorman.
Oh, thank you.
And how did you come into the writing poems? When I look at you, I see Amanda in you.
I haven't done poetry in a while, but when I started, I think it was just it was like a natural instinct because with essays and even when I would write short stories in college, that came from, I was very aware of what I was doing. I was putting in a lot of effort, but with the writing poems, it always just came naturally when I was a child before I really knew much about what you were supposed to do in terms of poems or anything like that.
Now we have the honor to hear from Kayla, and for the listeners, this is a nice treat.
Oh, thank you. So this is a poem called About Marion that I wrote about my grandmother. Remember her, 75, still tar black hair, still calling out perfect answers to television trivia. Pull me back, please, to 2006, to she and I sipping hot Lipton with milk and sugar like ladies, to she and I solving crossword puzzles, she in ink, I in lead, she long past palming greasy quarters into her stained apron pocket, driving in quiet just before dawn's first light, turning a key into the lock of a trailer that no one knows she keeps.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
I see you sitting with your grandmother, and maybe the crossword puzzle, you learned that from her. So crossword puzzle is also a form of writing.
Oh, I learned when I was older after she passed away that she used to write poems all the time when she was young. That was really cool. She was one of the first people who really got me into reading. Every birthday and holiday, she would buy me books, and she would tell me to write down all the books I read so that I could keep track of them. She was probably one of the first people I really connected with about writing and reading.
Do you have some of her writings?
I don't. My mom might. Everything was a little chaotic when she passed, and who gets what and all of that, but I'm sure it's around somewhere.
Thank you so much. I want to say thank you so much, Amanda. No, your name is Kayla. See, I already get their name wrong. It was so lovely to reconnect with you, and congratulations again from that MFA from Columbia University. Listeners, please connect with her. She might be the next Amanda. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What are you taking away from this episode? A lot of wisdom, a lot to learn. Thank you so much for all the insights. Take it from the Ironwoman. We have episodes every Monday with interesting people where you can learn a lot and follow them. And Take It From the Ironwoman is also the book. Download it or get it in your local bookstore. Support local small businesses. See you next time. Bye-bye. Thank you.